Welcome to the Canada Pavilion at COP28. Bienvenue au Pavillon du Canada à la COP28. Please take a seat. Our next event is about to begin. S'il vous plaît, prenez vos places. Le prochain événement est sur le point de commencer. This event is available in English and French. If you require simultaneous interpretation, a headset can be picked up at the entrance. Please ensure to return it at the end of the session. Cet événement est disponible en anglais et en français. Si vous désirez de l'interprétation simultanée, une carte d'écoute est disponible à l'entrée. Veuillez vous assurer de la remettre à la fin de la session. We are sharing this event space with other pavilions. There may be competing sound, and we're doing our best to manage this. Thank you for your patience. Nous partagerons notre espace avec d'autres pavillons. Il va y avoir de la compétition au niveau du son. Et nous essayons de gérer la situation le mieux possible. Merci. Et maintenant, accueillons nos prochains conférenciers sur la scène. Thank you and join me in welcoming our next speakers on the stage.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. My name's Alex Shabovsky, and I provide facilitation support to the First Nations Climate Initiative. And just before we get started, I wanted to ask a question. Could everybody that's not from Canada put up your hand? Okay, thank you. So I'll just give you a quick intro to the First Nations Climate Initiative, and then we'll get started. It started in 2018. 4 nations lead the initiative, 2 of whom are represented here. The initiative is led by 4 nations, but it's open to the collaboration and participation of all nations and non-First Nations organizations, levels of government, private sector, civil society organizations. The door is open. And if you have different ideas than the initiative, we're really interested to hear what they are. So we have I'm just going to introduce who we have here today. Starting on the far end, that's Hereditary Chief Barry Nicol, and then Candace Wilson. Hereditary Chief is from the Wet'suwet'en Nation, working now with Climate Initiative, and going to talk about transmission. Candace Wilson, Environment Manager for Haisla, and also related to the Niska, who's another lead nation, and Dave Myers, very closely working with the Halfway River First Nation. So thank you very much for attending today, and we recognize the slogan of COP28, which is Unite, Act, and Deliver. And last year when we came to COP, we sort of come together, the initiative come together and had a climate action plan, and that's what we presented. So that's kind of Unite. And now we're going to talk about what we're doing to implement the action plan in 3 key areas: nature-based solutions, new energy systems, and international collaboration, which is what decarbonization is all about. So really look forward to questions after we've made a few presentations. If you'd like to ask some questions, we're more than happy to try and respond to them. And hope that you find the presentation interesting and inspiring. Thanks so much. Over to you, Dave.
All right, thanks, Alex. As he said, my name is Dave Myers. I work with and for Halfway River First Nation, specifically Chief Hunter. And I was supposed to be here presenting with Chief Hunter on this trip, but sadly there was a death in the community, a death of an elder on council, and she has to be there for those services. So unfortunately she can't be here today. The elder was, her name is Maisie Medici, and I really would like to dedicate this presentation to her. So this is a video.
The Danisa people are one of the first peoples of the Peace region. The connection between the land and the people is very important. It provides our food, our shelter, water. Without any of those things, you don't have anything. Development started when the first settlers arrived, and it accelerated in the 1950s. All the other industries started to come in and destroy the land. It's really affected our way of life. It's just getting harder and harder to find the animals closer. They have to go farther and farther in the mountains. It's destroyed our berry picking places. It's destroyed some of our medicinal plants, and none of it's been put back. Because it was a promise from the government that these things would live as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the water flows. We all need to protect treaty rights. We all need to know what that is, and that we're all responsible for protecting treaty rights. The elders in the Halfway River have always said, if we don't take care of Mother Earth, then we have nothing. We have to provide for her, and she provides for us. Keeping that connectivity alive, working with the government, forestry, and industry together on trying to figure out what's the best way of not overdeveloping one area. The Halfway needs to have a say in all of that. They need to have a say in how things are developed and how they're restored. My hopes for the future is that I'd like to make sure that our way of life is not as broken by industry and development. I think by everybody knowing the treaty rights and working together to ensure that those rights are not infringed, then together we can be able to develop the land in a way that is not going to destroy the way of life of First Nations. It'll come. It just has to be everybody working together. By working with industry and working with the government, we're able to start to make actual plans, and the First Nations people have to be a part of the development.
Thank you. Just to wrap that up, by restoring the ecosystems, we are restoring the ability for Halfway to practice its culture, and the goals of climate change and habitat and ecosystem restoration are aligning here. So these objectives are aligning, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. So I would like to talk about the strategic fit between how Halfway wants to manage their land and carbon sequestration. Halfway wants to use nature-based solutions to not only sequester carbon and help reduce the impacts of climate change on their traditional territory, but also help tip the balance from extraction of resources to preservation. So at Halfway, we've spent decades articulating and spatializing our cultural heritage values. We've collected data that supports these values, and we've seen them change through development over time and also through climate change. These cultural values are diverse, and they range from air quality, wildlife habitat, but they also include sustainable job development for the community. Halfway doesn't manage these competing values in a silo. We don't manage them individually. We manage these values together, and Halfway sees the landscape as one whole, and each one of these values contributes to that whole. So over time, these values have been degraded because of a singular way of looking at the forest through the lens of development. We tend to look at trees for sale or underground resources for extraction. Climate change affects all these values too, through changing forest dynamics, altering wildlife habitat, reducing the availability of traditional foods, and reducing or destroying spiritual places and other values such as water quality. So we are working towards shifting this view, the paradigm. We are working towards putting values on keeping the forest. We are putting values on reforestation and restoration. We're putting value on changing management techniques that reflect Halfway's cultural vision and cultural values. Using nature-based solutions, using carbon credits, will have a two-pronged benefit of providing revenue to Halfway for keeping the forests and protecting the forests, but also reducing the impacts of climate change. UNDRIP has helped focus both government and industry in BC and Canada on changing the way we view our forests and resources. So it's helped to change the paradigm from resource extraction to protection. And by putting a value on standing forests, we are working towards achieving Halfway's objectives for living their traditional rights and making an impact on climate change. So what is a nature-based solutions project? A nature-based solution project is one where carbon is sequestered. And it's the net change in carbon emissions is calculated by tons of carbon dioxide that is sequestered. These carbon credits can then be sold to generate revenue through a certification process. And the validation of these credits on these projects must follow very specific protocols. So valid carbon projects must follow these protocols, and they outline very specific eligibility requirements, and they follow principles such as additionality, permanence, and verifiability. So carbon credits are a very novel way, a very unique way that's going to allow Halfway to achieve their management objectives by generating revenue for protecting their land rather than generating revenue through developing their land. So nature-based solutions allow Halfway to replace the current revenue streams associated through resource extraction, typically through the use of impact benefit agreements, with revenue for protecting and restoring the forests, restoring these natural landscapes. So there are 4 strategies for creating carbon credits throughout Halfway's territory. These 4 strategies for these nature-based solutions. One is restoration, one is avoided harvest, one is improving forest management, and the last one is avoided land use conversion. So, firstly, restoration projects include planting trees on existing disturbances that are unlikely to regenerate naturally. These will improve site and landscape level future conditions, and in many cases realize a range of environmental and social co-benefits, such as wildlife and hunting. The types of disturbances across Halfway's landscape that need to be restored are like permanent seismic lines, pipelines, and roads. These are the areas that need to be restored. Secondly, an avoided harvest nature-based solution project is one that protects areas that would otherwise be harvested in the future. So harvesting timber results in a loss of carbon off the landscape as trees are cut down, logs are removed, and previously living biomass is left to decay. So after harvesting, carbon sequestration and accumulation of carbon begins as the biomass begins to grow. Avoided harvest nature-based solution projects like this have the benefit of generating carbon credits sooner than restoration because it keeps timber on the land base in very specific areas, and these areas are typically based on Halfway's cultural priorities. The third method of creating carbon credits through nature-based solutions is improved forest management. This is a type of project that reduces the amount of harvest but doesn't totally prohibit harvesting. It's driven by a number of mechanisms such as longer harvesting rotations, partial harvesting, enhanced forest cover requirements, or limitations on harvesting within certain areas like riparian reserves. And finally, the last is avoided land use conversion. And so avoided land use conversion these are projects that would otherwise, they identify areas that would otherwise be permanently taken out of the land base, so agriculture and that sort of thing. So restoration projects and the kinds of projects that are going to increase the value of Halfway's cultural heritage, allow them to live their life and through their treaties and protect their treaty rights is very expensive, and you can't fund this through carbon credits alone. So restoration activities also don't tend to accumulate carbon, for decades, and this then delays the amount of money that one can get. So therefore, while restoration is a key activity, it's unlikely to be economically feasible by itself, and will likely need to use a complementary mix of funding and a mix of nature-based solution projects. But we project about 25% of restoration could be funded through the use of carbon credits generated through nature-based solutions. Historically, economic values and development have been at odds with Halfway's cultural values, but we need to find a new balance. Finding this new balance is very challenging. Finding a new balance requires trade-offs. These trade-offs are between a wide range of objectives and outcomes. These objectives can be development, job creation, required resources, but these must be tempered with protection and restoration. Carbon revenue is one way to mitigate the economic impact of managing for protection of Halfway's values. In other words, carbon revenue can tip the scales in favor of Halfway's cultural values. Carbon revenue allows Halfway to de-emphasize economic extraction while emphasizing the protection of culture by maintaining the land. So I would like to introduce now Candace Wilson to the stage. She is Environment Manager for Haisla Nation Council and Technical Representative for Haisla on FNCI.
Thanks, Dave. Yauts, Kiliasunugwa, Lagamda, Tzimotza, Haisla. I'd just like to ground myself in my language. I just said hello to everybody. I use my traditional name. My English name is Candace Wilson, and I come from Tzimotza of the Haisla traditional territory of the Eagle Clan. I'd like to continue on the nature-based solution aspect of FNCI. I was born and raised in Kitimat Village by my grandparents. Being raised by my grandparents gave me the opportunity to learn my culture and traditions, and they instilled in me the strength I carry today. They taught me how to process our traditional foods, specifically salmon and ulukan. So this video is of ulukan hanging in a smokehouse. When I built my own home, I also built a smokehouse so I could pass on the tradition to my daughter, who is now 10 years old. There are currently 3 generations when we work in the smokehouse. I have my daughter and my mom. My mom teaches me the traditional ways of processing our fish. Nature-based solutions are rooted in our connection to the land, therefore closely related to our culture and traditions. So these photos are of the salmon that I've worked on over the years. There's sockeye salmon that are in jars. and then sockeye salmon hanging in my smokehouse. I really feel that pictures are worth 1,000 words, and tying what we're doing within FNCI to why it's important to us is right here in these pictures. Last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, at COP27, we presented a high-level overview of FNCI's climate action plan. Since that time, we have been progressing the work. FNCI has been collaborating with Indigenous nations, carbon industry experts, and provincial government to ensure our policy framework will work with us rather than against us. FNCI is calling on Canada and BC to adopt our policy proposals so we can bring these solutions to bear in the race to net zero and beyond to achieve negative emissions. We are one of 8 nations who participated in a pre-feasibility study. This pre-feasibility study was a desktop study to inform each nation of the potential NBS projects in their respective territories, which span across northern British Columbia and have a potential of 8 million hectares of NBS projects. Each nation had different priorities and projects that ranged from protection and conservation, afforestation, and improved forest management. And as in my previous slide, another example of a picture is worth 1,000 words. Nature-based solutions in Haisla territory really are going to be fixing the issue that we see on this slide. So historic forestry practices in our traditional territory had a negative impact on our tributary streams to the Kitimat River. So my work with Haisla Nation Council, we have been restoring the riparian areas of these streams in order to build the ecosystem back up for salmon to be able to return to our systems. So currently we've completed about 5 streams, and from that, we actually didn't approach the carbon offset of those projects. So going forward, any of the restoration that we do complete, we will be looking towards carbon offset projects that will then feed into the economic benefit to our community. And these projects also provide a benefit to our community members who would rather be out on the land and receiving an income rather than working for industry in our small town. And so that's what Haisla's priorities are with nature-based solutions. And I'd like to pass it off to Barry to complete his portion of the presentation. Do you want him to do it? Or do you want to do it?
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the leaders, the delegates, and the people of Dubai for allowing me into their country and allowing me to do a speech. I'll introduce myself in my traditional languages, and I'll explain it after. So, Denise, Zakoze, Skaize, Saisozi, Beni, Sene, Misalos, Sabep, Kanu, Sai Witsut, and Witzet within Aston, Tayo Habata, Kadisit, Sabep, Laxiliu, and how I introduce myself, and when we're speaking at home, we speak to everybody. So when I say Denise, Zakoze, Skaize, I'm talking to the male chiefs, the female chiefs, and all the children of the chiefs. My name is Bini, my hereditary chief name. It means the brain and the prophet. Misalos is my mother's name. It means standing tall. Ganu is my father's name, the man who helps the people upriver. And my English name is Barry Nakal. I am from the Wet'suwet'en Nation in northern British Columbia, and I reside in my community of Wet'suwet'en First Nation. And I'd like to talk to you about renewable energy transmission and generation. As First Nations, we care about the welfare of our people, our community, our environment, the water, the air, and the earth, not only in our lands, but in a global community. In northern BC, 22 First Nation communities, along with our hereditary chiefs, the provincial government, the federal government, and the provincial hydro company, are working together on expanding renewable energy transmission and generation capacity. I can see the need for this new energy for the future, both globally and right at home in our community. Many Canadians don't realize that many of our communities still live and rely on diesel generation or experience regular power outages that could last days and can be devastating to our members when the temperature drops to minus 20. Yesterday we heard that the Indigenous Climate Adaptive Working Group is working on this with the province, and Candace is a part of that working group, and what they're working on is good for our people. And we as First Nations still experience challenges with the provincial electricity provider. But for the collaboration, so going forward, we will not let the past challenges and grievances be repeated. The 22 First Nation communities, as well as our hereditary chiefs that will be affected by this first new hydro transmission line, have committed to collaborate and play a leadership role to ensure that the energy needed to support our power is built in a manner that benefits all our First Nation communities and minimizes or avoids environmental impact to our territories. We've created a new organization, Cool Power, which means coming together as one. I'm not doing nothing. I didn't do that. Okay, we have created a new organization, Cool Power, which means coming together. We plan to lead the development in this new infrastructure so that it is done in the right way. And so we become owners of this energy infrastructure, of the economy, rather than bystanders while other people develop resources in our territories. It is very important that not only is renewable electricity brought to this region, but renewable energy generation projects can be developed and connected to this grid, many of which are on our territories, such as wind, hydro, geothermal, tidal, and hydrogen. The transition. The decarbonized economy of the northern BC will need to electrify current and future planned projects, as well as anticipated future needs for all northern communities, the Port of Prince Rupert, marine and land-based transportation systems, and beyond the global decarbonization effort. This will require a multi-billion dollar investment, effective doubling the current capacity of current Crown utility, and we intend to be the greatest contributor to the future economy since the railroad. But this time, to the benefit of the climate, the First Nations people, Canadians as part of the National Climate Action Plan, and to the world. So Canada's capacity to provide low carbon resources to the world relies on electrification. And yesterday we went to the Korea and the Japan pavilions, and they're developing new technologies to decarbonize their economies, like steel production. And they can use the low carbon resources to do this. Again, Masai Cho, big thank you, and for allowing me to speak again and on your territory. And I'll pass this on to Candace.
Thanks, Barry. Andy Robinson of Nisga'a Listens Government was not able to join us today due to a few losses in his family. He could not make the trip. In our culture, there are many duties that need to be filled when it comes to death and respecting the process. So as I mentioned earlier, I come from the Haisla Nation, but the other half of me comes from Nisga'a. My father is from Kincolith, and with that, I stay connected to that part of me through being able to access the natural resources in their territory. The Nisga'a Nation is taking real steps to help other countries decarbonize their economies while addressing poverty at home. The Nisga'a are building a net zero LNG facility on our lands and will export net zero LNG to Asian countries that still rely on coal to generate electricity. The Silism's LNG facility is designed from the ground up to set a new environmental performance standard, including a proposed floating design, which significantly reduces land and shoreline disturbance. In addition, the facility will have one of the lowest carbon intensities of any large-scale LNG export project in the world, utilizing several technologies and pathways to reduce carbon emissions throughout the life cycle. I'll now pass it over to Alex.
Thank you, Candace. So, Halfway and Haisla and Nisga'a as well are focused on nature-based solutions as one of the ways to help heal the climate and heal the connection to the land. Renewable energy transmission, which is going right through the middle of the Wet'suwet'en Nation's territory, as well as many others involved in cool power, is instrumental to decarbonizing the economy. Doesn't matter whether we're talking about critical minerals or transportation systems, water-based transportation or land-based transportation. The energy in the future that we're going to use in those transportation systems is ultimately derived from renewable energy. If we're going to manufacture hydrogen, for example, we need to use renewable energy to manufacture it. So that's why the energy transmission and generation capacity is so important to the future, and why Hereditary Chief Barry Nicol was talking about it. What Candace has just mentioned, that in addition to being concerned about restoring the ecosystems, her own nation, Haisla, and Nisga'a are both developing LNG ports, LNG terminals, producing LNG and shipping it overseas as net zero. Their plan is to, in addition to reducing the amount of methane reduction or methane emissions or any CO2 emissions, the residual is to be taken up with carbon credits, which they want to purchase from Halfway River. And the thing you need to know about Halfway River is that Halfway River is where the gas comes from. And that's the disturbance that Chief Hunter was talking about in the video and that Dave is talking about. That's the disturbance that was caused by extraction of the natural gas in the first place and will continue. So the nations are collaborating together to fix the problem in the land as well as to focus on the world and contribute to decarbonization efforts. And that's what I want to talk about briefly. So the real question in a Canadian context, and others might not think this is a question at all, but in a Canadian context, when we talk about exporting LNG, it's controversial. And the main reason it's controversial is the question is it going to be part of the solution or part of the problem of climate change? And you can imagine, well, if they take the LNG and they burn it, and they burn the coal and the oil, it just adds to the emissions. Of course, if they replace it, depending on the nature of the coal, if they replace the coal, it can reduce the emissions. We know that. We've all heard about it, and we've been arguing about it in Canada for quite some time. So we recently undertook a study to identify, we got Columbia University and researchers from Columbia University to help us identify the decarbonization pathways in Asia. Not hypothetical ones, but real ones. So is there a way for us to work together with the levels of government in Canada and Asian counterparts to activate those pathways. And that's what we've been focused on, to take resources from Canada like liquid natural gas, export it to the countries with the greatest promise for us are South Korea, Japan, China, and potentially Vietnam. And can we activate those pathways through collaboration with those countries? And when we do that, it's not just about utilizing the natural gas as a fuel. And most of us think about natural gas as a fuel. We don't think about it as a chemical feedstock. And one of the interesting things that you can do today is you can go to the Korea Pavilion and walk in the front door, and there's a company there called POSCO, big steel manufacturer in Korea. And you can look at the presentation, and what they're doing showing in that presentation is how they're shifting from using coking coal and fossil fuels to manufacture steel to using hydrogen. And using the hydrogen that they're one of the ways to manufacture hydrogen is through methane pyrolysis. That is heating natural gas up. Natural gas is methane, heating it up, and once it gets to a certain temperature, it cracks. It breaks. The molecule breaks into solid carbon and hydrogen. The solid carbon has a whole bunch of different purposes. Asphalt, car tires, you can make it into graphite, which is good for batteries, critical mineral, and there's no emissions. So when you look at the presentation in the Korea Pavilion, you can see how they're thinking of utilizing natural gas, which could be from Haisla or Niska, as a feedstock to manufacture hydrogen and solid carbon without creating any emissions and eliminating all of the emissions associated with the manufacture of steel. And that's difficult. Green steel from Korea, one of the biggest steel manufacturers in the world. So that's one of the pathways that we want to activate through collaboration with Korea. If you go to Japan, the Japan Pavilion, you walk in, you go right to the back, it's Mitsubishi Industries. And they have a model of a natural gas fired, it's a turbine in a natural gas energy plant. Lots of people burn natural gas to produce energy, like here in Dubai. And when you look at that, what they're doing is they're looking at how they can manufacture hydrogen and replace the natural gas in the turbine with 100% hydrogen. And we're talking about natural gas turbines that are 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts. Those of you that are from Canada, you've heard of Site C. That's 4 or 5 Site Cs. It's a lot of natural gas. But if you use the natural gas to produce the hydrogen using the technology I was just talking about, there's no emissions. It's a new energy system. It's part of a decarbonized future. So what FNCI is doing together with the provincial and federal governments is reaching out between producers and customers to see whether they can activate these pathways and document it in a transparent and verifiable way so that we can all see that it's real. It's not just hypothetical. It's actually a real commitment. And as we all know, the Paris Agreement has Article 6. And the Japanese are leading the way in terms of actually putting in place agreements under Article 6 to reduce emissions globally by sharing the benefits, the emission reduction benefits. Whether we get Article 6 credit in Canada or not isn't as important as if we actually produce a material reduction in emissions by working with the Japanese or the Koreans or the Chinese. All of them need to use resources from Canada and other places in order to achieve the reductions that they need to achieve. And we all know that those 3 countries are much, much larger emitters than Canada is. So we can make a big difference or contribute to global efforts to decarbonize and reduce emissions by working together with those large emitters so that they can utilize Canadian resources produced by First Nations in a way that helps them to decarbonize. And that's what we're doing. So, as I said at the beginning, we started by coming together. This is the slogan of this COP, and with a vision, an action plan. And what the leaders have said and the representatives have said is they're implementing nature-based solutions. We're building that transmission infrastructure, and we're starting to work with our Asian counterparts on a basis of producer-customer relationships, but ultimately relationships between nation states to document how we can utilize resources from Canada in order to help Asia decarbonize. And that will help the world to mitigate climate change. And at the same time, we're contributing at home. The nations are leading the way to restore the land and build the new energy systems that for a change they're going to own. Because those of you that know Canada know that First Nations don't own the infrastructure of the economy. Everybody else owns it. But the new economy, these nations are going to own that infrastructure. So they become the stewards of the future and the owners of the decarbonized infrastructure. So thank you very much for your attention. I think we have a little bit of time, right? If anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment, or we can wrap it early. Thank you so much for your attention. Does anybody want to ask a question? Yeah, here we go.
Thank you very much. My name is Philip. I come from Uganda. I'm more interested into the nature-based solution, particularly the land use conversion. How are you doing it so that it does not compromise with agroecology and regenerative agriculture? Because we run a danger in Africa, particularly in Uganda. Carbon credit is something which is, everybody is waiting for it. But in Uganda, 98% is agriculture. But we're having a lot of emissions. Climate change is real in Uganda. And if one of your strategies is land use conversion, how best do we do it without tampering with food security?
Right. So one of the ways that we would do that is through regenerative agriculture, through more intensive agriculture and that sort of thing. On the other areas, I think it's important to increase, the yield and the production value of agriculture that's produced on the existing farm base, the existing land base. Currently, in Canada, we don't need necessarily to increase our agricultural land to feed the population. We can move this production, whether it's into greenhouses or through other forms of regenerative agriculture.
I can do maybe another thought or suggestion is, as you know, ammonia is a very important input into agricultural production. And right now, the world's threatened with a lack of ammonia because of the war in Ukraine. And Russia is one of the biggest suppliers of ammonia in the world. And now we have a bit of a crisis of ammonia. Well, one of the things we do with hydrogen is manufacture ammonia. And so depending on how you decide to manufacture hydrogen, one of the beautiful things about hydrogen is everybody can manufacture it if you've got the energy. Either you manufacture it from water or you manufacture it from natural gas. There's a number of different ways to do it, including agricultural waste. And you can take that waste and you can produce either you can gasify it directly to hydrogen, or you can manufacture methane and then crack the methane to produce hydrogen, to produce ammonia, to increase the productivity of the agricultural system. So the regenerative agriculture can sequester carbon and reduce the carbon footprint of agriculture, but you can also develop the inputs like ammonia. And Tanzania is right next door. Your neighbor has a natural gas terminal, and they could do the same thing and produce ammonia for use in Africa, and do it in a way that doesn't increase GHGs. Go ahead.
My question is basically to probably all of the panelists. I'm just wondering if they're trying to greenwash nuclear energy and push it on the indigenous peoples there, because they've been trying to do that in Alaska. And from my understanding, there's no use for nuclear generation. They still don't know what to do with the nuclear waste that they're producing now, and they're trying to greenwash it.
We haven't tackled nuclear at this point. Obviously controversial. I think one of the things we all have to be mindful of is we got to turn over every stone and have real conversations about everything, including nuclear. But at this point, First Nations Climate Initiative hasn't done anything with respect to nuclear power, either small modular reactors or larger ones. But we certainly might give it a look. We wouldn't be afraid to try, because the problem's a real problem, and we might be able to make it part of the solution. So we should look into it. Go ahead.
So I'll do this very quickly. I'm Larry Russo, Executive Vice President with the Canadian Labour Congress. So the big question is jobs. Does this create jobs? The answer is going to be yes. So how are you approaching the whole question of who do the jobs go to? Who's going to be working on this? I'm assuming that Indigenous folks will be prioritized, but I'm just wondering if you've been giving the labor aspect, some regards, and what will be your approach on the jobs that are going to be created here?
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Sorry.
Okay. So for nature-based solutions, it really is community-driven. So community members will be the ones employed, as long as they get the required training. In terms of the LNG projects, there is priority for our own people to get employed first. Again, as long as they're trained and have the skills that they need to do those jobs. And then the other one is we have other large projects in our traditional territory, and that again gives priority to the Indigenous people where they're building their project. Hopefully that answers your question.
And with Halfway, in many cases, the jobs are located where the nature-based solutions are at on the landscape, and that's where Halfway's at. So the jobs are located there, and so the jobs typically go to those people who live there as well.
And just last to sort of add to what they've said, so it is going to create lots of jobs, everything we're talking about. And the simple answer to your question is invite you to participate in the First Nations Climate Initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you.